Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Happy Hour webcast from WhiskyCast.com. I'm Mark Gillespie in the WhiskyCast studio. Hopefully, we have no echoes. The sound is turned on, everything's working, and it's a good Friday. So, hope you had a very good week. We do want to send our condolences out to our friends in the UK on the passing earlier today of Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, and from all accounts and from what I've been able to find, a lover of fine whiskeys, and we raise a glass in his memory tonight. But we're going to talk about bourbons today, and I want to bring in Elizabeth McCall. She is the assistant master distiller at Woodford Reserve. Hi, Elizabeth. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you, Mark?
Okay, we are 3 weeks out from Derby Day, and this should be a much better Derby Day than the last one last September, right?
I think it will. We'll actually have people at the track, which is so fantastic, and I'm excited.
Now, I have to ask, because you just had a little girl a while back. Does she have a Derby hat yet?
She doesn't have one yet, but, I've got to find her a little something, a little flower for her hair.
They don't sell little My First Derby hat things in Louisville?
I don't think so, but I bet you could find one somewhere, or they should make them.
Well, as we all know, Woodford Reserve is the official bourbon of the Kentucky Derby, and you guys not only have the annual commemorative bottle that is out now at retailers around the U.S., but the $1,000 Mint Julep campaign kicked off this week.
Yes.
Tell us about it, because this year is different than previous years, right?
Yeah. So this year, we have had we've had an amazing response. We only have 5 $1,000 Mint Julep cups left, which is just phenomenal considering we just released it earlier this week. So this year's $1,000 Mint Julep is really exciting because we're celebrating, or we're supporting PATH, which is a project to preserve African American turf history. So we're celebrating the Black jockeys that were riding in the very first derbies in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And we're trying to they elevated the sport. We want to remember their contribution because they kickstarted everything. And, with our Mint Julep cups, what we're doing this year is we actually have the back inscribed. You can't really see here, but each Mint Julep cup, so they're beautifully etched. And this year it features the silk that Black jockeys would have worn during that time period, but the back is etched with the names of those jockeys who rode in the first races. So this one has Oliver Lewis's name inscribed, and he was the jockey who won the very first Kentucky Derby in 1875. And so it's just a wonderful way to celebrate these men that were riding the horses. And we've done that also with the silk that the cup comes wrapped in. So these beautiful silks is made by a local Black designer. Her name is Gwendolyn Kelly, and it actually has, a jockey in it with the figures around it, the roses for the running of the roses, and each cup comes in this beautiful purse because, the jockeys would have actually gotten a purse of their winnings. And this was also made by a local Black artisan, Albert Shumate. So he designed this, and it's just beautiful. It also comes with a wonderful Mint Julep too that we can talk about.
And we should talk about that because we have a question for you from Chris Ratcliffe. Dumb question, but why is the Mint Julep so connected with the Derby?
Oh, that is, it's funny. So what I love about the story of the Mint Julep is the fact that the Mint Julep actually started in Arabic roots, and it was kind of a concoction that people consumed, and it made its way to America and Virginia, and people were drinking this as a morning drink. And that's because you get up early in the morning, you'd have sore, achy bones in the 1800s. You did not have any Tylenol or ibuprofen or anything like that to soothe them. So you would make yourself a Mint Julep, and it would have the bourbon to soothe your aching muscles. You'd have the mint to freshen your breath, and the sweetness of the simple syrup to soften the alcohol. But then as that became, so you started seeing this around the racing industry or at the training barns, people drinking those in the morning. And eventually you started to you had that drink around the equine industry, but then people would start winning silver cups when they win these races. So the silver cup became very known around the equine industry as being the sort of cup. And then eventually it evolved to putting the mint julep in this cup because they wanted to have it to get all frosted with the ice, because you'd have all that beautiful crushed ice in there. It's a long sipper. And it just sort of melded together over the years. And Churchill Downs, we've taken it on, and the Kentucky Derby has taken it on as their drink. It is the signature drink at Churchill Downs on Derby weekend. They sell around 140,000 over the Derby weekend. Oh, I can't hear you.
Those are made with Old Forester, your sister brand, right?
So there is the pre-made mint julep that you get in the glass cups at Churchill Downs, and that is made with Old Forester. And then if you want to you can get a Woodford Reserve mint julep made, and because we are the official bourbon as well as the presenting sponsor of the Kentucky Derby.
And you present the race immediately before the Derby too, on the card that day, right?
The Woodford Turf Classic. We are actually we've discontinued that. We just have our sponsors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The other fun thing you get to do is you actually, the last couple of years, have led the pre-race toast about an hour before post time.
Yes.
At the track. And that's got to be fun in front of, 2 years ago, 100 and some thousand or 140,000 fans. Last year, much less than that. But you'll be doing that again this year too, right?
Exactly. And it goes live on NBC. So it's a fun thing to think you're there live with everybody at the track, and to know that you're out there with the world watching. And it's truly an honor to get to toast the Kentucky Derby as a Kentuckian. It's something that I just take so much pride in. We usually close it with celebrating the best of Kentucky on Kentucky's best day. And there's just nothing better than Derby Day in Kentucky, and with a glass of Woodford Reserve, of course.
And Graham Fraser in the UK wants to know how Woodford Reserve got involved with the Kentucky Derby. I can answer that one. They wrote a big check. I kid, of course.
Yes. No, when it comes to the sponsorship, for sure, I know there's a big check involved. But we actually got involved in 1999, and we were the only bourbon that has ever been asked to be the official bourbon of the Kentucky Derby. And it was because racing was really losing its luster. People were not as interested in the sport, and they tried to, what can we do to bring some life back into it? And Woodford was still a new brand, and Kentucky brand, where our distilleries in the heart of Versailles, which were surrounded by all those beautiful thoroughbred breeding farms. And so it just made sense. And I think that got people excited. We did the Derby bottle, started that tradition, and the $1,000 mint julep. And it just helped spark this excitement.
Now, I have to ask, because we've not really had a chance to address this, you're in the middle of an expansion project at Woodford. Let's talk about that too, because this is the first time the still house is getting some love.
I know. This is really, really exciting. We've added many warehouses over the years, and we've talked about expanding our distillery, and we are finally doing it. So we have our beautiful 3 pot stills. We're going to have another 3 pot stills mirroring those pot stills, which is just going to be breathtaking. I mean, I've only seen our digital renderings, and it's just hard for my mind to wrap around, but we are going to be doubling the capacity, putting in more fermenters. We're getting a whole new building. And what's really fantastic is I'm proud of our engineering team, that they've really done a good job it's a National Historic Landmark, but in maintaining the integrity of our distillery. That historic barrel run will still be in use. We'll still be able to take our barrels from the distillery, wheel them, roll them down to the warehouse on that track. So it's really exciting, and I can't wait, but I know it's going to be growing pains as we get through all the construction and everything.
That is really a key part here, because the building, as you say, goes back to the 1700s, back to the original LeBreau and Graham distillery. So they had to get all sorts of permissions and jump through all the hoops, literally. Not the barrel hoops, but the architectural hoops to get this approved, right?
Exactly. That is always a challenge when you're working with something that is registered on the National Historic Landmark, because you have to stay within the confines of you can't change the structure, the footprint of it. So we're really working on around that. And And the building that they're adding is actually going to be above, kind of floating above the existing base of one of the old warehouses. So that'll be cool. It's not going to touch it. We're still within the, following all the rules, but it'll be there and it'll still look aesthetically like the rest of the distillery.
Oh, this ought to be interesting. I know your boss, Chris Morris, is a history buff and an archaeological buff with all the work that's gone on there. So this has to have been driving him nuts for the last couple of years getting ready for this, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, Chris is so excited. And what we really always are excited about is like, let's try to incorporate that history. There's so many great sites on there that are just really hard to get to. So we're hoping that as part of this expansion, maybe we'll be able to open that up to more of the public to see these historical sites other than just the distillery itself.
We should talk about the Distillery Series Edition, the limited bottlings that you can only get if you visit Woodford. What's the latest one in that batch?
So the latest one that we just put out was the Double Oak. Came out in January, and that one sold out in 4 hours. So that's really, really grown in its popularity. And we're still working on which one will be released this summer, but be looking for something in June, July of this summer to be released, because it's always something interesting. Usually it's kind of one of those great catch-alls. We put interesting batches together of different whiskeys and then also different finishes. And so it's a fun distillery series that Chris and I love playing with.
And we should be seeing a new Masters collection released this spring too, right? In the next few weeks, I would assume?
We have, so Batch Proof was released a few weeks ago at 108.3 proof. That is the highest we've had. So those barrels really gave us a nice proof with that batch. We were really excited. Very pleased with the flavor profile, great oakiness and spice and some wonderful dried dark fruit notes. And then this fall, we will have our next Masters Collection release, which we're really excited. Can't tell what it's going to be yet, but but
nobody's watching. We won't tell. I promise.
I am really looking forward to it though. But know that it will be a difference in the grain recipe. That is what we have planned. But of course, we have so many lined up right now, just waiting and aging, and we're just being patient.
Tabitha Adams in the UK, can I request a port finished Woodford, please? Have you done anything with port?
We have finished Woodford Reserve in port before. We actually did a 5-wood distillery release last year, and it had Woodford Reserve that was aged in, of course, our new charred oak barrels, but two different types of port and 2 different types of sherry barrels, and we blended that batch together, and people were loving it. It was so delicious, and I do love a port finish, and so we might be looking into doing more of that and use it in different ways.
Okay. We have one more question for you before I let you go, because I know you have a limited amount of time because your husband has your daughter upstairs and they're waiting for you to get done with this. Graham Fraser wants to know how your journey into blending at Woodford is going, and when are we going to see your name on a release, just like we saw your colleague Jackie Zykan on an Old Forester 117 release last week?
I produced my first Masters Collection it wasn't just blending barrels together, but actually creating a new recipe and all that. We distilled that back in February. So that will be a couple of years before we have that out. I did, I'm always putting batches together with Chris. And so that's something that I'm always a part of. This past Masters Collection, my name didn't quite make it on the bottle, but it made it on the hang tag to say that I helped approve the batch. So that was really just such an amazing moment to have, my name on there and out there for everybody to see. But yeah, who knows when it'll actually be on one of the bottles, like Jackie's. I'm open to any time, but I've got to find something really cool to do.
So how many of those hang tags did you save in a box in a closet somewhere for the future?
I actually only have one. I'm looking, it's over there on my bottle, and I don't even know if I've showed it to my husband yet. It's just it came out, it happened. I was like, this is so great. And he was like, when am I going to see this? I'm like, oh, I've got it down there. I'm going to show it to you. And I just I'm in my studio office cave in the basement with all my samples, and I keep everything guarded down here.
And the branding and everything on the wall behind you there too.
Exactly.
I mean, I figured you were at the distillery, for crying out loud.
It's very nice. Because I think that these virtual tastings is going to be a thing forever. It really allows us to meet with people around the world very quickly. So it's nice.
Great. Well, I want to thank you for your time. I know you don't have a lot of time to spend, so I want to let you get going. And thank you for joining us, Elizabeth. And have a great time at the Derby this year. And hopefully we'll all be able to spend more time out there in the coming months as we get through this stupid pandemic.
I know.
So, thank you again.
Agree. Thank you so much, Mark, and enjoy your discussion with David.
Okay. Thank you very much. Again, that's Elizabeth McCall from Woodford Reserve, the assistant master distiller there. And the Kentucky Derby ought to be kind of fun. Hopefully May 1st, Saturday, the Run for the Roses. Whatever you feel about horse racing, it's the one day of the year when you do watch horse racing, and you do watch the Kentucky Derby. And I want to bring in our longtime friend, David DeFazio, now from Wyoming Whiskey, joining us from the wonderful town of Jackson, Wyoming. And you can see the trees have already started to bud there. But David, you got some snow this week, didn't you? Whoops, I'm sorry, David, you are still muted. You are muted, David.
Sorry. Yeah, we got a little snow. We got about 6 inches in the mountains and about an inch in town. You know, that's spring in the Rockies. So we'll be probably experiencing that for the next month or so.
And I want to put this view of yours into context, because I've been to your house, and your house, Jackson, is down here. The top of the ski lifts are way up here, and your house is right about here in the middle of them. So you've got this just great view out that back window out there, looking out over the town of Jackson, looking out over the valley, all the way up into the Grand Tetons and the national park up there. And there's a segue coming here, but tell us what's going on at the distillery right now, because we have not had the chance to have you guys on since we started these webcasts a year ago. So what have you all been up to?
Quite a bit, actually. I probably the biggest development is we hired a general manager. His name's Jason Brand, who comes to us from Ohio. He brings a ton of experience, and we've had him on board since December. He is doing an absolutely fantastic job for us, and we're excited to have him aboard. Our team has built out to where we're really comfortable with what we're doing right now, and obviously continuing to work with Nancy as we always have. And our planning is much better. Our partnership with Edrington has really challenged us to look so much farther into the future. And, obviously in the Scotch industry, they're looking generationally into the future. With us, we look, at least in the past, a maximum of 5 years. And now we're, being really challenged to look beyond that and plan a lot better than we ever have before, which is exciting. I definitely am a planner, and I like to have things organized when it comes to that. So it's been a really dynamic time for us in a really great way.
You mentioned Edrington, and I think it's been, correct me if I'm wrong, I think 3 years this year since that deal took place, or is it 2 years?
It'll be 3 years in September.
How has that worked out, besides forcing you to focus on the future? What have you guys gained from the partnership?
A lot. Edrington is a great company. What we like a number of things about it, but when we were going through the negotiation, things just felt really good because, it's owned by a charitable trust, and every dollar of profit that they realize goes to charity. And so, that just in and of itself, made us feel really good about this partnership as we were talking about it in the beginning. And now that we've been working with them for a couple of years, you really see the level of professionalism and capabilities that they have as an organization, and also individually at every level. You're working with professionals that care about what they do and really devote themselves to the company. And they have welcomed in with open arms. And I would say after about a year of the somewhat uncomfortable phase of, getting brought into their systems and whatnot. And it took a little time. But once we got through that phase, we've really been able to see what they're capable of doing for us and vice versa. And so it's been a really nice period of our development as a company.
What have you learned from this that you guys didn't know before? I'm assuming that you've talked with their wood guys like Stuart McPherson and some of these folks about the wood that you're using. And obviously your casks are going over to their distilleries in Scotland, I would assume now, as part of this deal. At least they get first crack at your casks, I would assume.
Yep.
What have you learned about the process that you guys didn't know that maybe Steve Nally didn't tell you?
We've been able to rely upon, their, I don't know what you want to call it, but their understanding of the science of it a lot more. So whenever we come up with an issue that we don't necessarily have an answer to immediately, we're able to get in touch with Scotland, get samples sent to them, have them analyze it, and produce some solutions for us. You're talking to people who've been making whiskey for a long time. And so, that's been a tremendous resource for us. I think there's been a little bit of learnings both ways, though, because for a company that is so centered on Scotch, obviously they do have Partita and they have Brugal as well. But I think that there's been a lot of carryover. They apply their understanding of Scotch into the American whiskey category, which helps a lot. But I think sometimes it doesn't necessarily fit. And so I think there's been a little bit of mutual education that's going on here. And, they're all ears. They listen, we listen, and it's a team approach. And so at the end of the day, I think we're coming up collectively with really good answers, really good solutions, really good plans for what to do moving forward.
David, we're getting, I think, some notifications on your end as messages come in.
Yep,
I'm hearing a ding, and so I don't know if it's you or me, but I wanted to check because I know I've got my Do Not Disturb on.
Yep.
But no worries. I just wanted to double check and see where that noise was coming from. So let's talk about your latest project. Since we were talking with Elizabeth about charity work and what they're doing with their annual Mint Julep, Wyoming Whiskey has its own charity project coming up here later this month with the National Park Foundation. Tell us about this one.
So this has been a while in the making, which was hijacked in large part by COVID. We were supposed to have gone to press, so to speak, with this a year ago, but we decided to kick it back a year, wait to see how things played out. And what we have done is we created a limited edition National Parks Edition bourbon. And this is in the background of this, I don't know how well you could see, these are the Grand Tetons, which I'm looking at here out my window, obviously from a different angle. But this is going to be a very limited release. It becomes available through Flaviar next week in a limited number of states. And then after that, Reserve Bar in New York only. And then there are 4 states where it'll be going through just general distribution, which is Georgia, Colorado, Wyoming, and New York. And $5 from the sale of each bottle goes to the National Park Foundation. As I mentioned a little while ago, Edrington, is owned by a charitable trust. And so they challenge all of their companies to come up with a partner, that we can donate to. And so our charitable partner that we chose was the National Park Foundation. It makes a lot of sense for us because, I could just speak personally. The national parks have provided me with so much enjoyment, especially with fishing and climbing, skiing in the Tetons, et cetera. And Yellowstone provides so much of our revenue stream, candidly, for the region and for Wyoming whiskey. There's something like 6 or 7 million people that will travel through Yellowstone in a given year. And a lot of those people are grabbing a bottle of Wyoming whiskey. So it made very good sense for us to partner with them in order to come out with this initiative. But probably the most exciting thing, well, I should probably wrap up talking about this bottle. This is a 92 proof bourbon that is fantastic. Anybody who gets a chance to pick up a bottle of this is really going to enjoy it. And
I'm waiting.
You'll get one.
I'm waiting for the sample. Yeah, I'm waiting for one. Yeah.
I'm sure Lauren and Valerie are listening. Let's make sure we get Mark a bottle immediately.
Yeah, they've said they're sending one. I'm just waiting for it to get here because I can't wait to try it. Go ahead.
But you're doing something for the parks at the same time, so $5 from your purchase goes directly to the National Park Foundation. But we have a auction coming up on April 20th. And this is really the centerpiece of the entire initiative. We hired, sorry about that beep. We hired a photographer here named Tuck Fauntleroy and chartered a plane for a number of trips over Yellowstone and the Grand Teton National Park. And he took hundreds and hundreds of photos at the direction of Harrison Ford, who was involved in this project with us. And Harrison,
people might have heard of him. Yeah,
he's an actor. If you haven't heard of him, he's also
carpenter. Done a lot of things over the years. So.
Yep, guy's got big hands. I tell you, when you shake that guy's hands, he's worked with wood. But anyway, he's a great guy, and as you know, he's very philanthropic when it comes to all of the conservation initiatives and overall environmental activism that he's been involved in. So when we approached him and asked him if he would be willing to be involved in this, he said yes. And so we asked him, what would you like to see on these bottles? And he said, how about some images of things that most people don't get a chance to see? Let's not do Old Faithful. Let's not do the traditional Oxbow Bend image of the Tetons. Let's look beyond the box and find some really interesting angles. And so we whittled it down to 4 images. And so each of these images is taken, 1 from Grand Teton National Park and 3 over Yellowstone from the air during a particularly snowy October. So what's really neat about it is you get this contrast of open water, like the lakes and the rivers, with this brilliant white, in the fall. And so one bottle's of the Grand Teton taken from the Idaho side, actually, looking back at the Grand and the Tetons with Jackson Lake in the background. And it's just a phenomenal photo. I've never seen anything like it. The second is of the Hayden Valley and of a creek that's winding through the snowfield. It almost looks black and white, which is kind of a signature of what Tuck does. The third is of the southeast arm of Yellowstone Lake, where Yellowstone River, basically headwaters of Yellowstone River, flows into the lake. And then the fourth is of the Black Sands Basin, which is a lesser geyser basin that a lot of people don't get a chance to see. And so each one of those images will be on an individual label, and each label is underneath the label is a very unique bourbon or whiskey of Wyoming whiskeys. And so we are proud to, release this. And it's not just a single barreling, it's a single bottling. We literally removed 1 bottle's worth of whiskey from each barrel. And those barrels will never be offered individually again, but they do represent the best of what I would consider the 4 main flavor profiles of what we offer as a distillery.
Wow.
And each comes in this beautiful wooden box made from wood from the area. And on the lid of the box is a laser engraved topographical map of the spot where the photo was taken. We have cards inside that are signed by Harrison Ford himself. And it comes with a large format print of the image that's on the bottle and a beautiful print behind museum glass, etc. And so all of this goes up for auction on April 20th. And if you're following any of our social media feeds, you'll be able to sign up through there. And it's going to be an exciting day, and we hope to raise a lot of money through the auction of those 4 bottles. We also have a number of products from the Dude Ranchers Association of the West, from Franco Snow Shapes, from Whiskey Leatherworks, a number of our partners that are really excited to be a part of this.
And Crump Crumpler says, damn, I wish I could get this in Virginia. Well, if you sign up for the auction, Crump, you might just be able to do that. Just bring your checkbook, okay? Nurse Dave's Shaving World, just an emoji, just a wide open mouth there. And this money actually goes to help what the federal government doesn't do to support the national parks. Give us some impression of that, because a lot of folks figure, well, tax dollars pay for everything. And frankly, no, it doesn't.
Correct. And there are hundreds of national parks, obviously, around the country that this will benefit in some small part or small way. But the budgets that they have get stretched, and there's a lot of upkeep that needs to happen. There's a lot of renovation that needs to happen in a lot of these parks, and the National Park Foundation's dollars will go to supplement their budget from the government. And that's why they were set up. A number of parks have these charitable arms. There's the Grand Teton National Park Foundation. There's Yellowstone Forever, that work with individual parks. But the National Park Foundation is there for all of our nation's parks. So it really provides a really nice addition to what they are getting from our federal government.
Where can people find out more? Just through the Wyoming Whiskey website, or is there a special website?
Go to the Wyoming Whiskey website, and or just go to our Facebook page or go to our Instagram page, and you'll be able to link up with what you need there. And if you would like to sign up for the auction, we encourage you to do so. There will be items that will be going for in the $1,000 range, and then all the way up to these bottles, which we are hoping to see a collective haul of maybe over $100,000 for the 4 bottles.
I'll donate some WhiskyCast Glencairns. They won't reach $1,000, but if that would help, every little bit helps for the parks.
Well, maybe if you fill them with some of those specialized whiskeys behind you, we'll be able to bring in a little bit more.
Maybe I'll make a blend.
How
about that? We'll make a blend or something like that. But we have a good question for you now. First of all, what's in your whiskey glass tonight? Because I know you had one there. What do you got?
I'm just drinking our small batch, actually, and I'm going to probably be diving into a little bit of single barrel a little bit later. I'm going to have a couple friends over, and I really enjoy our single barrel. I don't have any of our this year's Wyoming only release yet. It's all been batched, but that'll be coming out under its new label probably in June. And that and a glass of water. That's what I'm looking at.
And Crumpler says he doesn't think the Virginia ABC board would let him, even if he could afford it. What the ABC board doesn't know won't hurt them. We can always say that. Okay. Hey, before we get into other stuff, I got to ask, your governor just signed a new liquor law that the legislature passed in this current session. How does it affect you guys in terms of what you can do at the distillery, in terms of shipping to within the state, and does it have any effect on you at all?
No, necessarily, but I will tell you that we were behind an initiative to get a second, the word is a satellite location allowed here in the state. So as a manufacturer of alcohol in Wyoming, we pressed back in 2011 to be allowed to have one because we absolutely needed to have an attendant tasting room to the distillery. Because there's a very, very small wine industry here, they're allowed 3 satellites, to be allowed to grow. We then this year pushed to be able to be given a second, to bring us in a little bit of parity with the wine industry and just to allow us, I think it's just the natural growth phase of our company. And so there was a little bit of pushback and some unease about it within the industry because they look at us as wanting to compete with retailers, which couldn't be any farther from the truth. I mean, our retailers are our lifeblood. And so there's nothing that we're going to do that's going to take money out of their pockets, at least intentionally. And so we have as a result of some legislation that was just passed this last week, we will have an ability to have a second satellite location. And our plans are to locate a tasting room and retail store on the town square or very near it here in Jackson.
Which I think makes perfect sense because a lot of folks hit that western part of Wyoming and come up through Jackson all year round for the skiing in the winter and the visits in the summer and everything, having been to Jackson. I think that makes perfect sense for you, although there's a retailer in Jackson that I know ships a lot of stuff for years out of the state. And is that going to cause any issues for them?
We've been in full contact with them. We've been transparent about, I actually hate that word. We've been totally upfront with them and what our plans are. And we've agreed to disagree on some things, but at the end of the day, we're not going to do anything to burn that bridge. There are a number of retailers here that do right by us and vice versa. And we're going to do everything we can to continue to maintain those relationships through our private barrel program. The liquor store here in Jackson sells so much of our bourbon and our whiskeys that we want to make sure that they stay just as strong as they've ever been. They buy a couple of private barrels a year We hope they continue to do that. We'll do tastings at their shop as soon as we're allowed to do that again. So it does present challenges though, Mark. I mean, not everybody's going to be happy with what you do when you want to grow, but it's our goal to try to minimize the risk for them and show them that we're just as strong of a partner as we've ever been.
And there's this whole argument that a rising tide lifts all boats, because you can't ship out of state, but that Jackson liquor store can ship, because I've bought from them here in New Jersey. So
I don't know if they do it much anymore, because they received enough cease and desist letters from different states around the country.
New Jersey didn't send them one.
Probably not. But
we don't care.
You did, and probably Virginia. But I think that that's a saying that's used quite often, and I do believe in it, because the greater the brand awareness, the greater the chances are that someone walking through any liquor store here in Jackson, Wyoming, anywhere in the country is going to want to pick up a bottle. And if we could do our part by being great ambassadors on the town square, letting people know how great we are as a result of a free tasting every day of the week, then I think that's going to benefit retailers in the long run.
Absolutely. Good question for you now from Graham Fraser in the UK. He's never tried Wyoming whiskey. When are we going to see Edrington start to bring more of it into Scotland, where Graham lives?
I would encourage you to get in touch with someone at Edrington over there and ask them that question. I'm the impatient one of the bunch, as anyone as part of our team would agree with. And I would love to see our product sold in Europe. I would love to see it sold in Scotland first. And then, there are a number of other countries that have reached out to me personally about, how can we bring it, how can we start some distribution? I do know that there are some bottles that make it to certain liquor stores over there through some sort of back door. I don't know how it works, but I have received a couple emails from people who have managed to get their hands on a bottle in England and told me how great it is. And it makes me very happy to know that it's getting there. I don't know how legal that is, but we have no part of it, but it's just kind of nice to hear that it does trickle over there in some way. But at this point, it's really supply. If we had a ton of whiskey available, then I would say it would be quicker. But right now, we're getting quite a bit of demand here in the United States. And once we have that normalized and we understand where that's going to be, I think we'll start looking overseas more seriously.
And I know your stuff's in Canada now, and especially in Western Canada. It's been available for several years now. So
yes,
maybe it's getting over through that way, or maybe people are just muling it over on international flights pre-pandemic.
It could be. It could be. I don't know how it's ending up in the stores, but yeah, I have no idea.
Chris Ratcliffe has a good question, and I know the answer to it, but I want you to explain this. What makes Wyoming good for making whiskey? And having been out there a number of times and been to the distillery, including for your opening day back in 2012 when the first release came out, people can find that video on our website still. What makes Wyoming good for making whiskey?
First off, let me pay respects to Kentucky. Obviously, Kentucky is the birthplace of bourbon, and we never tried to be a Kentucky bourbon. We defiantly almost said we're not going to be a Kentucky bourbon, even though our first distiller, Steve Nally, was from Maker's Mark. Our goal was to come up with a uniquely Wyoming product that was great, but that set itself apart from what I think most would consider to be a almost 100% Kentucky-dominated industry. What sets us apart and what makes this environment good is these massive temperature swings that we see in Kirby, Wyoming on a daily and annual basis. There's upsides to it and there's downsides to it. The upside is that the most severe daily temperature swing is going to be up to 50 degrees outside of the warehouse. Obviously, with all that thermal mass inside, it takes a lot of time for those barrels to heat and cool, but you're experiencing pretty major temperature swings within the warehouses as well and within each barrel. So that's causing this almost vascular approach. It's happening more quickly each day. It's punching deeper into the wood. It's pulling out every day. And so I think we gain a lot in the summertime that you won't find in a traditional maturation environment like Kentucky, where you got a lot of humidity. You have temperatures that aren't going down much at night. Having lived there when I was a kid, I remember it's not great sleeping weather in Kentucky at night. It's great in Kirby. It gets very cool. And so as a result, we find that it's not an accelerated maturation, but it is a very effective maturation environment. And the air that's flowing into those barrels is very different than what you're going to find in Kentucky. Kentucky, you're surrounded by bluegrass and other traditional southern grasses and trees and whatnot. We are surrounded by sagebrush and other rangeland grasses. So the ambient notes that each barrel is picking up is going to be very different in Wyoming than what you get in Kentucky or other environments. And I'm not saying it's better. It's definitely not worse, but it's different. And it's what makes it truly Wyoming. And so that's what I think is really putting a stamp on it as being Wyoming's whiskey. And then I would say the negative of our maturation environment is in the wintertime, once those barrels drop below 40 degrees, there's no maturation that's happening. They go into hibernation, much like a bear. And they take on a really bad, like grassy note, a wet grassy note over the winter months. So we don't harvest barrels in the winter. We do our best for when it comes to planning. We've got tanks full as we go into winter, and then we are slowly reducing them, bringing them down to proof, and then bottling as needed. This year we got caught because the demand for Wyoming whiskey was so great, both nationally and here in Wyoming, that we ran out. We literally have none available at the moment, and Wyoming Liquor Division is almost out. So we're going to be putting together, I don't want to call it an emergency batch, but we are definitely going to be pulling together a batch at a time of year when we normally wouldn't. Luckily, Nancy selected it last fall. We know the barrels to put into it. And so we'll go into production on that here in the next week or so. But that's a long answer to a short question, but it's just uniquely Wyoming. The temperatures here are very different. The environment's very different. It's very arid. The distillery is at about 4,200 feet, so it's got a lot of elevation to it. And the water that we use is, believe it or not, a limestone aquifer, which we were talking about the luckiest find when we were looking.
Yeah, I wanted you to get to the water part, because the water is even better than Kentucky's, right?
I would say yes. And the reason why I say yes is because while they're both limestone aquifers, we're pulling ours out from a mile deep. And allegedly, as the folks down at the University of Wyoming say, it hasn't seen the light of day in 6,000 years. It doesn't need to be filtered. We use it pure. And I don't think many distilleries can say that, when you're harvesting water right out of the surface from creeks and whatnot. So we're really using the purest, sweetest water that you can find in this industry, I think.
Explain the origin story for this, because you guys found the water source, and back in the early days, Steve Nally, your original master distiller, was actually driving a water truck 100 miles up to the source and then back to Kirby until the pipeline was ready, right?
Correct. It was actually a 5,000 gallon milk truck. Originally, it was designed to haul milk, and we purchased that. And so twice a week, he was driving up to Manderson, which was about a 100-mile round trip. And we're bringing 5,000 gallons at a time. We had a giant cistern tank that we were using to hold it. And little did we know when we started that there was a water line that was slowly inching down the highway from the Worland Water District down towards Kirby. And it took a couple years, but ultimately it reached Kirby. And now we literally take it right out of the tap. We couldn't have been luckier when it comes to finding this water source.
And we should explain, because Kirby is about 12 miles north of Thermopolis, and it's right in the middle of all those sulfury hot springs. So the local water isn't good for a whole lot, is it?
No, it's terrible, actually. It's interesting. You don't necessarily want to be drinking the water anywhere over there. And for us to have access to a water source that's so pure and so perfect for whiskey making, we're really lucky for it. But yeah, we're in Hot Springs County, Wyoming. So anybody who knows anything about hot springs knows you got a lot of sulfur. You know what sulfur does to whiskey. And, we were facing a situation where we might have had to really filter everything that we were using. And that just strips water of all of its goodness and badness. So the fact that we are where we are is very lucky. Well,
I have a bottle that I've been sitting on for a while now that I picked up a while back in Indiana, of all places, at Big Red Liquors, one of your single barrels that you did for Big Red Liquors.
Excellent.
In Indiana. And I figured this was a perfect time to open the sucker.
All right.
And unlike these folks that believe in the neck pour thing that I've wasted the last 24 hours of my life arguing against this whole thing, that the initial pour of a bottle of whiskey is really bad because of the headspace and the air thing. There are words I could use that I'm not going to use on a broadcast, but sláinte and good stuff. I mean,
what's the proof on that bottle?
The proof on this bottle is 92. It's your 46 private stock.
And what barrel number are we looking at?
Barrel number 1655 for Big Red Liquors. And don't know what Nancy had to do with picking this one, or if they picked it from what Nancy and the folks at the distillery picked out. But we should explain the role that Nancy Fraley plays for you guys, because she is literally the queen of American whiskey blenders, I think.
I couldn't agree more. And before I start singing her praises, I'll tell you that the bottle in front of you, first of all, has been around for a while, given the number. And what we do is we select a number of barrels that's made available to the private stock program. And then we'll send 4 or 5 samples out to each account, and then they pick which barrel they would like. So Big Red would have selected that barrel themselves after Nancy had given it a first look through. Nancy Fraley should wear a cape. She is an amazing human being in so many ways. She is such a multifaceted human being. She plays bass. She is conversant in any area of anything you ever want to talk about. I think she's a genius. And she also happens to have the greatest nose and palate that I've ever seen, which I guess doesn't say a lot, because I haven't been in the industry as long as a lot of the folks maybe even on this call. But I think anybody would agree that Nancy is really the queen of the American whiskey category when it comes to nosing specialists and master blending. She helps us out so much, and she really understands our DNA now. You know, she's been coming out to Kirby 3 or 4 times a summer for years now, and really understands the direction that our whiskey is headed. She's tasting younger whiskeys, younger barrels, and can, know where that's going to be in a few years. Some things do surprise her, and I think that probably happens in any distillery. But she really provides a level of sophistication that we never had before her. No offense to Steve, but there just aren't many people that walk this planet that have the abilities that she does. And so it's been an honor and a privilege really to work with her. And anybody who's ever picked up a bottle of Wyoming whiskey, at least in the last 5 years, has tasted the fruits of her labor.
And I would agree with that completely. We've talked about this before in various interviews. That original batch, and I still have a bottle of batch 1 in the cabinets behind the camera here, was outstanding. The first one you released in December 2012 at Kirby. The one I scored originally 95 points, and then it kind of dipped off a little bit after that, but then about batch 30 or so, it started kicking back up in the quality side and really started getting good again about the time Nancy came in. And you can make the argument that distilling and blending, there are people who can do one or the other, but very few people can do both. And I think that's where the strength of you guys has come in, is that the blending strength that Nancy has, because you guys have learned how to make good whiskey. Nancy takes those barrels and turns them into something special.
She does. And you make a really good point, Mark. Steve Nally was a great distiller, and he did a good job of blending as well to a certain extent. But I do think that he's a product of Maker's Mark, where Maker's rotates all of their barrels. And their goal is to have the most consistent barrel, no matter where you pick it from the warehouse. And you could pick 5, 10, 100, 500 barrels and blend them, and the hope would be that you would get the same result. Nancy takes a different approach to that. She says, no, absolutely do not rotate your barrels, because that ruins the opportunity for creativity. And she could blend around a bunch of things. She could blend for consistency, or she could blend for uniqueness. And that's the real exciting part of being an owner of a distillery, is that you've got thousands of barrels from which to choose. And for instance, with our Wyoming only release, which has kind of been my pet project of sorts, I could say to Nancy, all right, here's what I'm looking for. And when she comes in her first blending sessions, and when Derek picks hundreds of barrels for her to sample, she will go through and she'll say, all right, these are small batch barrels. This one's going to be a single barrel. Hopefully we find a barrel strength, but then she'll find the 8 to 12 barrels that are going to be the Wyoming only release. And we're gunning for a very particular flavor profile that you wouldn't be able to get if you were picking from a warehouse of rotated barrels. And so it's been really exciting to have somebody like that. I mean, it really is exciting because she could come up with almost anything. Stargazer from a couple years back. I don't know if you ever got a bottle of that.
I did.
It was our only, I mean, she chose 2 barrels that had chocolate notes in it, and it was the darkest in color. And probably the deepest and richest bourbon that we've ever put out, with these really strong chocolate notes that who would have known that they existed, but Nancy, of course, can find these barrels. And so it's a lot of exciting to work with her, and she'll be coming out in early May and getting to work again. And we've got a long list of things for her to take care of. And I'm looking forward to her visit. I
mean, I keep wanting to get Nancy on one of the webcasts or on the show, and she's done it once before, but she doesn't like to, she's a very private person and doesn't like a lot of publicity and doesn't like to do a lot of interviews, but she deserves a lot more credit than she gets within this industry. And she deserves to get some of these Master Blender of the Year awards that don't always go to people who have the nosing skills and the blending skills that she does.
She deserves any award and recognition that is out there, because and maybe one of the reasons why she doesn't get the notoriety is because she works with smaller distilleries. And I think she really enjoys that. I know that she has been given the opportunity to work with larger distilleries, and I think she's consciously chosen not to, because it's fun for her to work with a number of different organizations that are making a variety of different things. And it gives her an opportunity to continue working in the Armagnac part of the world, which really was her first love, and I still think is her main love. And so it might be just because she's working with smaller distilleries that she's not getting the recognition that she rightly deserves. But I'd be the first one to put her up for, the Master of the Year in the United States, just judging from what she does with us.
You broke up there, but I think we got your point. Give me a sense of what you've got coming out this year besides the Wyoming only release and the new National Park edition. Anything new can we expect from you guys?
Yes. Slight change to Outrider, which, as you know, was made in November and December of 2011. And we each year have been pulling out barrels from both of our mash bills from that season to make Outrider. Well, we're almost out, Mark. And the original thought was we would just let it ride off into the sunset. And it was a great run, and that was that. But Outrider has developed such a following that we started making more of it a few years back, almost 4 years ago now.
Before you get into this, explain what Outrider is for those who are not familiar with it.
The short story is I asked Steve Nally to make rye, and a guy who makes only wheated bourbon at Makers didn't want to make rye. I went to my partner. Brad leaned on him a little bit, which is hard to do on Steve because Steve's a big man. And
Steve makes me feel small.
Yeah. Steve's a 6'4", 6'5" guy, nicest guy in the world, but he didn't want to make rye whiskey. But he did, or he kind of did. So he made 100 barrels of, quote, rye. He made 200 barrels of bourbon with rye. And I fully expected it to be terrible because he didn't want to do it. I thought he would have intentionally made it home. Turns out he didn't. He left a few years after he made it. Nancy comes in, our distiller at the time, Sam, and she tasted some of these barrels, and they said, this is some of the best young rye I've ever had. So we kept an eye on it. Long story short, when the day came to get an idea of what we're going to call it and what the mash bill was, came to light that he had only made a 48% rye. And I ultimately asked him, why'd you do that? He said, because I told you I didn't want to make rye. So it was an intentional act of defiance by a guy who is a staunch supporter of wheated bourbons. And so what we did, Brad, Nancy, Sam, and I put our heads together and came up with a blend that combines 2 barrels of bourbon made with rye that he made with 1 barrel of this almost rye, which was a 48% rye, 40% corn, 12% barley. And it came together and we named it Outrider. Outrider is the name of the horsemen that ride on the flanks of cattle drives, keeping the strays in. We figured that was an appropriate analogy for, what these barrels really were. So about 4 years ago, we got to making it again, this time with 51% rye, which would give us the opportunity to make a rye if we want, which is in the longer range plans, but not on the immediate horizon. So what we'll be doing this year is we're going to be taking some of the younger barrels and we're going to be blending that with the older barrels in steel, putting it back in our barrels, letting it mature together over the course of this summer. And then August, September-ish is when we'll be bottling and coming out with this year's iteration of Outrider. So that's one change that you're going to be seeing. The overall flavor profile of it is not very different. We did a prototype batch last year, and we were very happy with what we found. So that's going to be something kind of exciting to look forward to. And people who like Outrider can rest assured that we will have Outrider available, moving forward for a long time. And then we've got some old barrels now, Mark. And so we're going to be looking at maybe doing some very limited releases in the 9 and 10 year range, maybe of some of that rye bourbon, maybe a single barrel of this or that that's super old. That's still in the plans. And then for next year, look forward to a Yellowstone anniversary edition because it'll be celebrating its 150th anniversary, and we're going to do something really kick-ass for that.
And I want to see your 10th anniversary release, December of 2022.
Yeah, we're probably going to have a big party again, and if you're nice, you might get an invitation, Mark.
Graham Fraser wants to know, and this was brought my question up with, are you going to develop rye and single malts? Single malts, I don't see a market for you guys, but you could do it. But when are we going to see a Wyoming whiskey rye?
Well, as soon as it gets of an age where we're happy with it, I think that's when we'll start to consider a Wyoming whiskey rye. And, as you can imagine, there's also things going on with new product development with us. And a small batch rye is definitely in the works. When that's going to hit, I don't know. We're just so happy with Outrider right now that that's kind of our de facto rye. And so we don't want to compete with ourselves on that in a way. We're just so happy with it. So maybe next year, maybe the year after that, I don't know when you'll see the rye. We are going to be experimenting with a number of things. So single malts is something that, we might be doing a little bit of experimentation here, but at the end of the day, we're not trying to be Glenrothes, Highland Park, or Macallan. And, that's one thing that I continue to hammer home with people is let's not try to be something that we're not. We are Wyoming whiskey, and we make bourbon and we make an American straight whiskey, and we want those to be the greatest in the industry. So let's really focus on that as opposed to diversifying too much, too fast.
But I'm going to play devil's advocate with you, David, because I know that in those fields around Kirby in Hot Springs County, there's a lot of barley grown for the brewing industry. So I know you've got good barley in that area. And I bet you could make a kick-ass single malt if you really wanted to.
Given our partners, I know we could. Yeah. At this point, I think it's all about getting our legs underneath us and growing into what we should be as an American whiskey maker. And once we feel confident that we're doing that right, and I think we're doing it right, but there's still a lot of learning and growing to be done as a small company. And once we get past that phase, and this is just me speaking, on my own behalf, but I think it would reflect most of the feelings of the board and our owners, is let's get that done first. Let's feel 100% confident, shoulders back, walking down the street saying we're making the best thing out there. then we're going to start looking at getting into maybe the single malt. But at this point, there's no immediate plan on it.
Whiskey Canuck in Canada asks this one: have you encountered resistance from the distribution channel in getting your product out? Perhaps because Wyoming doesn't have the reputation of a traditional whiskey producing region. Let me modify that question before and after Edrington, because part of the Edrington deal was getting access to their distribution network.
Exactly. To the Whiskey Canuck, I'll say yes, because we're from a non-whiskey producing region, that definitely doesn't help. However, the biggest hurdle comes as a result that we're just too small. And I think any small distiller who's listening in on this or watching this would agree with me that at the end of the day, major distributors do not care about you unless you add to the bottom line. If you come up with something like Screwball that just catches fire right out of the gate, and traditional whiskey drinkers like us may not like it, we might think it's a bastardization of the category and whatnot. But at the end of the day, people love it. You know, it's the new Jägermeister. It's the new whatever shot. Unless you come up with something like that, lightning in a bottle, they're not going to build your brand. I mean, I've had countless distributors say, we're not brand builders. That's not what we do. And until you get big enough to actually show numbers and put up numbers for them, they're not going to put resources behind it. So I think that's really the biggest problem that small distillers face. And we definitely were in that category. I think we had all of the other makings for a great company. We just didn't have that distribution network and oomph that you needed to really drive the brand. And Edrington brought that and a number of other things. But the thing that we were most looking forward to and most seeking when we were talking to a number of companies a few years back was we need distribution. We didn't want venture capitalism or capitalists. We didn't want any of that. We needed someone who had established distribution networks and a commercial team that would be able to sell it. And Edrington has some of the best commercial folks out there all around the country. And if we have a problem in Southern Texas and we need to address something, there's Blake. You know, I mean, it's just boom. We've got these people in place, and they do have some sway with distributors because at the end of the day, they own Macallan. And if people want Macallan, they're going to have to, you know, cater in some small part to the other brands in the portfolio. And so we're benefiting from that.
I got to ask, when are we going to see a rum cask finish Wyoming whiskey, since there is that partnership with Brugal Rum in the family?
You asked a good question. I asked the question too. I would love to see some of their rum barrels. I'd love to see some of Partita's barrels up here. I'd love to see our barrels going to them. But there's something, I don't know what it is, but I think it just takes time. One thing about the Scots, as you know, is they take their time in making decisions on stuff. And I don't know what other politics might be in play behind the scenes, but we haven't seen it yet. But as soon as we have the opportunity to start doing some barrel trading, we would jump at the opportunity.
Well, they want to save your barrels for their stuff. That's why they did it. They want your barrels in Orkney and Speyside and down at the Glenrothes and all over the place. They want your barrels for their Scotch whiskey. Let's say, go ahead.
I was just saying, and they do have them. I mean, we've shipped some containers over there. I'll be interested to see what product, you know, they end up putting in there and what's going to come of that. And we have been given the privilege of receiving some of the some used HP casks and some fresh sherry oak casks as well that we'll be doing some experimentation with. And so I think what you're going to see, as opposed to a single malt coming out sooner than later, is you're going to be seeing we're looking hard at a different sherry finished bourbon. Obviously, our double cask is finished in PX barrels, but we're looking at what are the sherry casks that we're getting from Edrington producing as a product, and is that a shift that we want to make for our double cask or come up with a new product? And then the HP casks are going to be very different, obviously, and offer a finish that is going to be really unique. And by the way, I love Highland Park's distillery. That Orkney Island, that's a fantastic place. If anybody out there has never been and you want to go to a really neat, really cool classic distillery, that's the spot.
Oh, yeah. I would live on Orkney in a heartbeat. I love it there. Watchman 999 in Calgary. Rumor has it that American Rockies bourbon is a Wyoming whiskey bottle. Yes, no, maybe so.
Maybe
I
so.
don't think so, but what?
Maybe so. I'm not at liberty to confirm or deny.
Oh, really? I didn't think you guys sold to outside bottlers.
I don't know what else to tell you. I answered the question.
Okay. Cannot confirm or deny. Okay, fair enough. I'm trying to think here of... let me ask you this question, because as one of the co-founders, along with Brad and Kate Mead, what is your own personal favorite bottling of Wyoming whiskey?
I think it's kind of an unfair answer for me to say that there was a particular single barrel that I had one time that was phenomenal. So leaving our single barrels out, that would be my answer. It's going to be our Wyoming only release, because like I said, that's a product that I've kind of guided that one. That's been kind of my own pet project. And we want Wyoming to have the best. And so our Wyoming only releases are very limited. They've been 8 barrels in the past. This year, because the demand is so great, we're going to a 12 barrel batch. These are slightly higher proofed. It's in the 95 to 99 proof range. This year's will be 96. I'm not going to tell you the name of it yet. I'd rather keep that a secret for a little bit longer. But we honor iconic people, places, or things that are truly Wyoming. Steamboat was one of the first, and nobody knows, that's the horse that's on our license plate and that you see associated with Wyoming everywhere. It's the horse that couldn't be ridden. The reason it was called Steamboat is because it broke its nose as a colt, and whenever it started breathing hard, it sounded like a steamboat's whistle. Statesman was a product named after Senator Hansen, who's Brad's grandfather. A 2-term U.S. senator and governor of Wyoming. Statesman is just the right name for him. He was a fantastic human being. He passed away at the age of 97, so Statesman was a 97 proof bourbon. We did Hole in the Wall, which there was a lot of there's an outlaw history behind Hot Springs County, and the Hole in the Wall gang holed up to the east of Thermopolis, quite a ride, but at the Hole in the Wall. And so we wanted to honor Thermopolis and Hot Springs County's outlaw past, and that was last year's. And these are all slightly richer versions of our small batch at a higher proof, barrels taken from the middle part of the distillery, what we consider a B flavor profile, A being in the bottom, kind of being the lightest, the caramel, orange, and vanilla. Top would be the spiciest, and this is the middle, which I consider a very rich bourbon, and it's rarely 5 years. It's usually a combination of 5 and 6. This year's is going to be the oldest Wyoming bottling at 7 years. So that's my favorite. I'm proud of it personally. I'm proud of the work that Nancy puts in for it, that Sam put into it in the past, and that everybody at the distillery does. And it's really neat to make that available to Wyoming only, and to see it sell out through the liquor division in a matter of hours on the day that we release it. It's really neat.
This may be a cheeky question, but with Kanye living out near Cody, has he been out to the distillery in Kirby? I know that's not that far.
It's not that far, but he's gone. He packed up the ranch and left. Apparently there was a number of moving trucks that went to Salt Lake, and he's gone. He was doing a bunch of good things for Cody in that area, and he wanted to build manufacturing facilities and whatnot. But word on the street, and I spoke to one of the writers of the newspaper in Cody, is that he's long gone, and he did not stop by the distillery. It was my plan at some point to have a care package delivered with some whiskey, and I wasn't given that opportunity because he left.
His loss.
His loss.
His loss. David DeFazio. Well, let me ask. We have one more question from Graham Fraser, and I got to admit I don't know the answer to this one. Are there any other whiskey distilleries in Wyoming? Has anybody popped up since you guys started up and released that first whiskey in 2012? Yeah. I don't know of any.
Yeah, there are. They're very small. There is Jackson Hole Steelworks here in Jackson is primarily a vodka and gin maker, but they are doing some bourbon aged gins and are starting to make some whiskeys. It'll be a little while, I think, before you'll see any of that commercially available. There's a guy outside of Cody, actually, that's making some. The folks at Backwards in Casper are making some. So there's a couple out there, but I wouldn't consider them to be really commercially viable. That's unfair to say. They're commercially viable, but they're just super small, only available here in Wyoming, to the best of my understanding.
And I'm laughing because I know that you and Brad and Kate originally thought about putting the distillery in Jackson and then realized, no, this isn't going to work. The local attitude will never allow for a whiskey distillery in Jackson, and that's why it went to Kirby, right?
Yes. When we thought about it, there were a number of hurdles. The first being...
And this was 10 years ago. This was 10 plus years ago.
Yes. The first hurdle was basically locating a chemical plant in Teton County, Wyoming, in front of the Tetons is something that no one would have wanted. Second of all, the price of land in order to open this up would have been far more than what it is in Kirby, Wyoming, I can assure you. And the Meads were not going to put a distillery on their ranch in historic Spring Gulch, nor should they. I mean, we all were in agreement on that. And then the commissioners, there's just no way. We laughed about it. I mean, in this town, as in many towns across America, you ask for permission and the answer is no every time. And then you got to fight your way to yes. Well, years later, one of the commissioners walked up to Brad and said, why didn't you put the distillery here? And he's like, you've got to be kidding me. You can't be serious with that question. They just see that it's been so successful that they wish it was here in Teton County. It could be one more attraction for the folks who come through town here. But yeah.
You're preaching to the choir, David, because I live in a dry town.
You do?
It's been dry. Yeah, because I've lived in a dry town since long before Prohibition. So yeah, I know exactly where this is coming from. I mean, it only in the last year and a half did we get a brew pub, for crying out loud, and a local microbrewery. So yeah, I'm just going, yeah, I can see that completely.
Well, it doesn't look like you need to leave your house. Looking behind you right there, I don't think you need to go anywhere.
No, I don't. But thank you, David, for everything. You have been a great friend over the years. I have had many great times out at Wyoming, at Kirby, and in Jackson with you guys. And it has been fun to share your story over the years and to share it again tonight. So thank you for joining us, David. And give my best to Brad, Kate, and everybody out in Kirby at the distillery. And good luck with the auction on April 20th.
Thank you very much, sir. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and visit with you.
Okay. Once again, David DeFazio from Wyoming Whiskey, thank you for doing this, and we'll say goodbye to everyone. I want to let you know that we have Brent Elliott from Four Roses coming on the show next week, and that will be again at 5 p.m. New York time on Friday, April 16th, and we're going to have another fun interview the following week after that on April 23rd. Brian Kinsman from the Glenfiddich and William Grant & Sons has agreed to join us. So we will be doing those interviews over the next couple of weeks. We'll have a fresh episode of WhiskyCast coming up for you this weekend. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks again to our guests, David DeFazio from Wyoming Whiskey and Elizabeth Call from Woodford Reserve. Catch the podcast this weekend, and I'll see you next Friday at 5. Take care of yourselves, wear your masks, get your shots, and sláinte mhath.